Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of today's first session, Clemons.
Hey everybody, we have topic today, understanding America, the state of play in the US elections. It's nice that we're doing this. I mean, I don't know, they gave us like 30 minutes for this. I mean, I need about 2 days. We have a fantastic panel coming up. Let me just say here real quick, we had our video, but let me introduce the panel. Let me invite up here Ivo Daalder, CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Come on up, Ivo. Jacob Heilbrunn, who's the editor of the National Interest. I'm a contributing editor of National Interest, so Jacob is theoretically my boss. We have Sally Painter, who's on the board of GLOBSEC here, co-founder of Blue Star Strategies, very involved with many campaigns. Sally, why don't you come over here? They didn't want to sit next to each other. And then we have Kurt Volker, former U.S. ambassador to NATO, and of course our former presidential envoy to Ukraine. It's great to have you all here. What a great packed room. You know, and I've got, look, I mean, I've already tried to give Slido lessons, pull out the Slido, but I also like to go live. Do we have microphones in the room if I want them? I think we do. If not, you can speak into my mic. But I want to go live with a couple of questions as we do this, because I think this is an interesting topic at in a big moment in American history, and I think we're narcissistic enough to think we matter so much that it matters to all of you as well. I'm not sure that's true. We can test that thesis. But I think that what is really interesting is, I'll just say this, until really very recently, the US election looked completely differently. We had President Biden running against former President Trump, two former presidents, or well, one incumbent president running against a former president, and it looked in many ways like a done deal. And right now, the deck has been reshuffled in many ways, and we're going to talk about the dynamics of that. But let me just start for a moment with Sally Painter. You know, Sally, has been this. I was just at the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention both. The energy and whatnot was different. Of course, the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee was going on, and they were running against Joe Biden. And boy, you know, something happened, which I never expected, actually. I didn't think President Biden would actually step down and step back. But he did do so, assessing the scene. And I believe at the ultimate moment, it was his choice. I don't think he was run off the stage. Some may disagree with me. Kamala Harris is now the nominee, and it stacked up unbelievably fast. I mean, for people in any country to look at, you know, how power works, it usually doesn't work that quickly or neatly, and usually there are a lot of bodies buried behind the back room in what happened, but that didn't seem to be the case. So let me just start out with you, Sally, and kind of look at what has the shift with Kamala Harris and now Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, done in terms of polling, in terms of attitudes, in terms of enthusiasm. What's your quick take?
It's changed everything. I think you saw that while the Biden-Harris presidency did wonderful things on the economy, stock market higher than ever, job growth, inflation down, all of those things, there was a concern that the president wasn't maybe up for it. And so
So he had done a lot, but what I'm saying, I don't mean to interrupt, but is they were bad at marketing the good things that he had done.
I think the press was bad at picking it up.
Oh, thank you.
And they still are, frankly. But what I think we realize is, number one, that the Democratic Party are patriots first. Mm-hmm. You had President Biden step down. You had Nancy Pelosi step down at the height of her power. And what you felt was this unbelievable pent-up desire to have some new leadership. And the elation that our party has felt with this incredibly strong candidate slate is unbelievable. We've raised more money than ever. Mm-hmm. The excitement, the people that are volunteering.
Like an insane amount of money.
Obscene. Almost $500 million. And it's still coming in.
But let me just ask you one question, because you mentioned Nancy Pelosi, and I'm sorry to all of you who may not follow every nuance and every name that we're about to drop. We engage name dropping in Washington at cocktail parties and whatnot as part of the sport. A woman named Heather Podesta has a famous last name. At the Democratic National Convention, created these little pins, and she made 50 T-shirts. I got one of them. It's upstairs if everyone see it. And it had the silhouette of Nancy Pelosi called the Godmother, you know. and Nancy Pelosi was apparently furious because it allegedly was sort of talking about the power of Nancy Pelosi to essentially whack Joe Biden, knock him out of the race, and bring Kamala in. Is there no ongoing convulsion or stress in the party, Sally, over that?
There is none, and frankly, that's not true. Pelosi said that it's his choice. She did voice some reservations early on when the debate went so badly, but she said, this is the president's decision. In the end, he made this decision.
Right. So let me jump to Kurt Volker. Kurt was ambassador to NATO. Somebody's clicking here. Hopefully it's not me. But was ambassador to NATO when John McCain was running for president against President Obama. So he could not actively engage that campaign. But I want to mention it because Kurt was exceptionally close to Senator McCain, who was also very, very supportive of GLOBSEC. But he also worked for President Trump as envoy to Ukraine and many other. I don't know if you worked for any Democrats. I think you're all Republicans all along the line.
Clinton and Obama.
You did work for Clinton and Obama? Okay, I'm sorry. Those are lesser, those were the small font type. But you're my Republican here, and I guess my question to you is, how do you see the moment? How do you see Kamala coming in? And how do you see Donald Trump and his vice president, who was surprising to many, J.D. Vance, the U.S. Senator from Ohio, author of Hillbilly Elegy? How do you think they stack up in the chessboard of this election?
Yeah. Well, first off, I think Sally summarized it very well. The selection of Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee changed everything. So Trump was feeling like he was cruising toward an election victory, and routinely coming 4 to 5, 6 points ahead of Biden in polls. And now it is a dead even race again. In all the swing states as well, it's dead even. That's a huge change. It has also thrown Trump off of his game. He, as you said at the Republican convention, he knew how to rile people up and to talk about Biden and go after Biden as a candidate. He's having a hard time doing that with Kamala Harris so far.
Just 1 second. Ambassador Dan Fried, I've got a chair for you right here in front. Everybody, this is the hero, the transatlantic relationship. Ambassador Dan Fried, right in the front, Dan. Give him another round of applause. Okay. Yeah. Okay, please go ahead.
So it changed everything. It is an even race now, and Trump has not found his footing yet. Also, Kamala Harris has enjoyed a free month.
So what does that mean, Trump hasn't found his footing yet? How do you? What's the evidence of that?
He has launched a couple of attacks, some of them very personal, on Harris, and they have landed with a thud. Mm-hmm. When he's done that,
like she just decided to be black,
right?
When it became convenient,
that's not going to work.
And I don't know if anybody follows that. I just want to make sure.
What did he do? He went after.
Yeah, go ahead.
He went after crooked Hillary. People got that. He went after low energy Jeb. People got that. He hasn't found a way to talk about Harris yet. He probably will.
But tell the audience what he did about she just decided to be black.
Well, so there's a lot of explaining behind that. She's the child of Jamaican and Tamil immigrants. She went to Howard University, a historically black university. She has been in public office for a long time. She doesn't look as dark complexion as some other black people. So he was going after a vibe saying, oh, she's just pretending to be black because she gets some kind of benefit from that in politics. Well, it's counterfactual. I mean, it's just not what she has done with her life. It's not what people see, and people resent the race baiting behind it.
I mean, that's what I wanted you to raise, and I want to come to Ivo for a minute because I just don't want us to walk and pussyfoot around real issues that are evolving in the campaign, because there are a lot of Americans, and I just want to be honest, there are a lot of Americans who enjoy that race baiting and who want to see that typology around race, and it's a disturbing thing to me. And I think it was a conscious decision by President Trump to go into, I'm allowed to comment today, I'm also speaking, but to go into a group of black journalists and basically say, out of political expediency, Kamala Harris, who had built her identity and life, and if anything, if you kind of listen to Kamala Harris, very, very rarely references either gender or race in what they're doing. It's very different. And decided to do that. So I just wanted to raise the point again from the Republican perspective where you're at that. How comfortable is that notion that one of the leading contenders is using race as a dividing line in the country?
It's not, and that's why it landed with a thud. It's not comfortable. Certainly, you have a far right in the Republican Party who might get riled up like that, but that's a fraction, and it's never going to get them propelled to get reelected that way. Let me reframe what we're talking about here. What Harris needs to do, the race is going to come down to issues, and the issues that Sally raised are right. The data that you just gave about the stock market and so forth, that's true. The ones that people care about are immigration and the border, crime, and the price levels, which is the result of inflation. Inflation's down, but prices are still high, and that's the nature of things. That's what people are concerned about. What Harris has to do is convince people that she didn't have much to do with the Biden administration, because on those issues, people don't look favorably at the Biden administration. What Trump needs to do is convince people that he's better at those issues than she would be, not just creating chaos. And that's the election coming in the fall.
Let me bring Ivo and Jacob into this, but I want to do it in a unique way. I'd love to hear Ivo's thoughts on how this race is taking shape in terms of the key issues, the identity issues that are being developed, and whether there are historical metaphors from it. To remind people, Ivo is the CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. But when you're the head of a global affairs organization, you're not only looking just at the world, you're also looking at domestic drivers of foreign policy. I think one of the other things that's on the table, and I just want to put it out there again, and I have Republican friends who support Donald Trump who will strongly disagree with me, but I see it as a neo-isolationist ticket, as one where some of what Donald Trump is trying to do is, he doesn't want to be in wars because he doesn't want to be engaged in the world. I mean, part of it is whether or not the disengagement thing, because you're telling Americans that no investment of American lives or dollars is worth it because China ends up winning, even if we're making the investment. And so I'm interested, as you kind of look at this terrain, Ivo, you can disagree with me, how you see those elements in this election, but how are they playing out in the choices when it comes to foreign policy and America's engagement with the world?
There's a lot going on here that we can talk about, but let me focus on sort of where we are in this moment in terms of the foreign policy related part of the election, because something very big is happening within the Republican Party. In fact, something very big is happening in the United States writ large. This is the most important election that the United States has had since at least 1860, and arguably since the beginning of the Republic.
So 1860 was when Abraham Lincoln was elected, just to remind us.
Which led to the Civil War. Not his election, but after that election, to be perfectly clear.
Yeah.
And we can talk about the historical significance of it. One of the parts of which it is so important is it's the first time really since 1944 that the United States has a deep division about how Republican and Democratic voters look at the world. It used to be, not that long ago, in a Reagan Republican Party, that a deeply internationalist, pro-alliances, pro-promotion of freedom and democracy, pro-free markets was the leitmotif of the Republican Party and the Republican voters in many ways, and that the Democrats were seen as the less inclined to be engaged in the world, the more favoring of multilateral institutions in the United Nations. Yes, NATO, but really larger organization like this. Yes, pro-democracy, but really more pro-human rights in some ways. And on trade, pretty doubtful. This is a swift 180%, not only because of what Donald Trump, to the extent that anybody can get a hold of what he thinks, because he says the same thing, the opposite thing in the same sentence in every speech that he makes. But leave that aside. Let's look at the voters. Republican voters are distinctly more reticent to have a strong American role in the world than Democratic voters. And the gap is not only big, it is growing, and it has been growing over the past 10 years. And if you compare the average Republican voter, and particular the Republican voter who believes, who has a very positive view of President Trump, to kind of the Republican voter in the late 1930s, you don't find a lot of difference. And indeed, it is the same influence of a pretty isolationist, we don't want to be engaged, we don't want to be part of wars, we don't want to have alliances that existed in the 1930s, not, by the way, in the Republican leadership, but in the Republican voter, that you now find in the Republican Party. And the Chicago Council is doing polls
So
for
can
50
I
years
just, as
on
a
this.
balancer, just intervene and ask you one thing? You know, you and I both know Senator Jim Risch, who is the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and also Mike McCall, who is the chairman of the House International Affairs Committee. I would argue that both of those individuals would say that they are Republicans who believe in supporting NATO, who believe in supporting, you know, trade, who believe in international. So can you go a little bit deeper and paint the picture? Like, are they becoming anomalies in their own party, or are they still leaders in their own party?
So they're becoming anomalies. So yes, of course, there are Republican, particularly Republican elected officials, including non-elected officials like Kurt, who retain a very much the standard Reaganite view of Republican engagement. There are probably more of them in the Senate. They're now a minority among Republicans in the House. So if you look at recent votes that we had in terms of funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for Taiwan, in the case of all three of those votes, which happened in May, a majority of Republicans in the Republican House voted against it. Strong majority in the case of Ukraine. A strong majority of Republicans in the Senate voted in favor of those. So there is still a part of the Republican Party in power in both houses of Congress that remains internationalist. Unfortunately, their standard bearer within their party doesn't believe that,
right?
Nor do the people who surround him. And in fact, it's that influence that has changed the Republican electorate as well as the elected officials.
So you were telling me in a little side exchange that you felt like this smelled like an earlier era of history.
Well, yeah, that's a slightly different part of it. It's not just on the foreign policy side. The kind of racist rhetoric that we've heard from Donald Trump should raise the question: how can any self-respecting person believe that you should support somebody like that? And the reason is, and 50% of the country, 48% still does. It's going to be a close election. How can it be a close election when you have a guy who goes around not just dog whistling, but actually just saying purely racist, misogynist, lies, anti-democratic nonsense, which Donald Trump has done for a long time, and say, yeah, well, I'm going to vote for him because he's good for my taxes? How do you explain that? Well, you explain it by going back to history. Democracies are inherently fragile. They're based on consensus and norms. And if the consensus and norms can be defied, and they can usually be defied without punishment, the punishment has to come within. In the United States, it's not coming from within. We are at the precipice of the kind of situation in the United States that we unsuccessfully witnessed in the 30s in Germany, in the 20s in Italy. My parents grew up under occupation. My mother's a Holocaust survivor. My father grew up in occupation in the Netherlands. And my father spent his entire life studying how you could prevent democracies from falling apart, to which his answer was, you can't, unless the people are willing to make sure that democracy survives.
Right.
That's what this election is about, because if Donald Trump wins, it's not just 4 terrible years.
Right.
It's the beginning of something far worse.
Well, let me ask Jacob to kind of take us a notch further. Another element of this that I've been struggling with, and Jacob and I have been in many roundtables, and I've been impressed with the consistency of his view, despite a lot of change in the players, whatnot, and also when you look at, you know, I'm sort of a Nixonian realist, and I look at things like the Ukraine invasion, like the conflict in Gaza, like elements of the stress in China and Asia, as in part not just a perception of American weakness in the world by foes, but by allies, where allies' behavior is changing and they're hedging their bets, thinking America may be contracting strategically from some of the things it's been committed to over time. And I think that's also part of this election. Jacob, I think you see it completely differently than I do, and I really respect that. And I'm interested, as you've seen Joe Biden now leave the stage, or he's in the process of leaving the stage, but as you look at the kind of global conflict scene and you look at the US political electorate, and you see Kamala Harris, and I just want to be honest, a lot of my Democrat friends get hugely furious with me, and Sally may get hugely furious. We know almost nothing about her. The convention is trying to fill that gap. But we almost know nothing about Kamala Harris. I mean, when you know nothing about someone, it's when they do best. When you know a lot and you see the warts, you see the gaps, you see the the vendettas and the vengeance or whatever she has with certain players, it gets a little more complicated. We're going to learn a lot in the next 70 days that we didn't know before, in my view. She's going to go through the meat grinder of media, and I don't think it will be as pleasant or happy at this moment for the Democrats right now. But just given the fact you've thought about this a lot, and I just want to kind of get your own sense of the chessboard and this moment for America and the choices making. And, go ahead.
Well, I am an optimist. I think Kamala Harris is going to win this fall. I think she has been wildly underestimated, that she's quite ruthless and formidable. And, people were completely dumbfounded. The day after Biden stepped down, I did this interview with the FT, and they looked at me like I was bonkers. But I said that Harris was going to roar to victory. And it's pretty much turning out that way. Now, the negative...
So what did you see that we didn't see, or that I didn't see?
Speak for yourself.
I have never thought that Donald Trump embodies a positive message. And I think it's much more difficult to win an election in the United States when you are purveying doom and gloom about the future of the country, particularly at a moment when America, looked at rationally, is actually at the peak of its economic and military prowess. It is being discounted around the world and by some in the United States. I flatly reject it. I don't think the country's ever been as prosperous as it is. I don't think NATO has ever been as powerful. Now, the danger is we could witness a huge self-inflicted injury in November. This could indeed, if Trump were to win, it would completely scramble the chessboard because, in my view, he would exit from NATO. He would sever or diminish the alliances in East Asia, which are just as important. He would cripple the independence of the Federal Reserve. I mean, in a sense, and I don't think enough has been made of this, what we saw at Arlington Cemetery, where Trump and his goons tried to overwhelm representatives of the federal government and of the military. This is a microcosm of what he would do as president. If he were elected and made this astounding comeback from having tried to launch a coup on January 6th, if he comes into office, he won't be emboldened. He will see no limits, and he will, of course, appoint people who are ready to execute his will.
So let me ask you something. Madeleine Albright, for whom a stage is named upstairs, wrote a book about fascism, and she said, guess what? Fascism is elected, usually. Yes. It doesn't come roaring, it's elected. And I'm interested in this question about the legitimacy of elections. And you just said if Donald Trump is elected. I still see a circumstance where Donald Trump could be elected president of the United States. And I see it as right now, if the election were held tomorrow, I agree with you. Kamala Harris would be president. I think if in the 70 days, I think it's going to be more suspect. You also have a lot of the judicial branch basically stacked up in such a way that should there be disputes and whatnot, given various appointments, and if things go to the Supreme Court, we have a politicized court. So I can see the potential of Donald Trump. So that raises the question of if Americans, through the Electoral College, through their system that they have in place, elect Donald Trump, what does that say about America?
Well, it says that and actually I disagree with Kurt. I think Trump is campaigning the only way he can. I don't think he can campaign on policy. He needs to throw everything at the wall, which he's doing, and try every possible avenue, as disgusting or as abhorrent as many people may find it. It is, in fact, his only path to victory. What does it say about the United States? It says that we've shot ourselves in the foot and that that we are not, in fact, an exceptional nation in that case. We are no different than Hungary or even Russia because to my mind, just to end, is, many people in Europe have trouble understanding or ask me what Trump is all about. He's simply a mixture of Orban and Putin. There's nothing unique or original about Donald Trump.
Sally, let me come back to the polls for a minute, because when President Biden was still in the race, one of the things that was happening, if you look at the polls, was two of the groups that put him over the top, in my view, in my telling of it, were youth. Youth came out in very large numbers in the last election, larger than normal, but also the community of color. 92% of the black voting population voted for President Biden. And there was significant erosion. And some of that erosion was about the Gaza crisis. It may be for other factors as well. Maybe because they saw Joe Biden as an 81-year-old person that they didn't, connect with any longer. But I'm interested in that element of polling and the shifts on that. But also we have a question here on Slido that says, do you think pollsters have overcome their past tendency to underestimate Trump? Because as we know, there are a lot of methodological problems right now in measuring public attitudes. And I remember Kellyanne Conway, President Trump's pollster, saying there is basically an unseen American out there, an ignored American who's going to come out and polls. And this is who the people at J.D. Vance are talking about. Are we basically intoxicated in our own fumes thinking that Kamala's doing so well? And is there a structural problem in measuring Trump's strength?
So I thank you for that. I think this is very important. So this is going to be a very, very close race. Secretary Clinton won the 2 million additional votes, but lost the Electoral College. So when
So she won the popular vote.
I'm sorry, the popular.
Almost all Democrats win the popular vote, it seemed, but they.
Well, recently.
Yeah.
So I'm just to give you some facts, because there are only 32% of the population is a registered Republican. 36% of the population is a registered Republican. Democrats are a larger voice. What's the biggest group? Independents.
Independents, yeah.
48% are independents. What do independents care about? Independents care about freedom, fairness, climate change, gun control, women's reproductive health, economy. We've had the best economy. We're having a soft landing. In the G7, we have the best economy. So we have a great economic story to tell. The press is not telling it. And what Trump did, which, when he realized that it was Biden, he thought Republicans can get elected if they double down on their base. And so he picked a person that was his base, actually Trump light and less articulate if possible. You can't win this election without going to that independent vote. So that's a very important category. And we're going to maybe win by 200,000. The second is the swing states. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, the blue wall. Harris is ahead in those races right now because they're looking at those issues that independents care about. Because of Harris, we now have...
But she's not up by a lot.
Hey, I'll take it.
Okay.
It's been a couple weeks. Give her another.
All right.
Then we have two more states that are up that we had never expected, North Carolina and Georgia. And that's where you're getting to the African-American vote.
Right.
And just, again, I think it's really important, some statistics on the demographics. Since 2022, registered Hispanics have increased by 12%, 36 million new votes. Black vote that is registered is up 7%, 34 million votes. Asian Americans up 15%, 15 million new registered voters. Of these new, I would say, minority voters, 44% identify as Democrat and only 20% as Republican.
So let me ask you about that. I'm going to be blunt, maybe get myself in trouble here. I mean, none of us on stage happen to be Asian, Black, or Hispanic.
I'm a woman, that's good.
Yeah, I'm gay, but it doesn't count anymore. But I think that the question when it comes to these elements of identity that I think is one of the big dividing lines to come out where we started was that some white Americans feel stressed by the orientation by the rise of other groups. And I think some, Democrats wonder, where's my place if you're a white male in the Democratic Party? And I think that's been one of the points where people don't know where the North Star is. And so, Kurt, coming at this from the other side, one of the real things that changed, which Ivo was getting into, is white working class men used to be the actual foundation of the Democratic Party, have largely become Republicans. J.D. Vance is out there saying we are historically the most pro-worker, pro-labor party, Republican Party, ever. So is the dividing line the fact that those that are white are defecting and leaving the Democratic Party? I mean, is this going to be decided by the tectonics of race?
Yeah, I don't think so. In fact, I think it has less to do with race. I think it has more to do with social class and economic class. People look at a liberal elite in the country, not just talking about politics, but media, business, tech, whatever. They look at a liberal elite and they feel left out and somewhat disenfranchised. And when Sally rightly talks about minority groups increasing numbers of voters,
Right.
the other way that people are increasing number of voters is getting people to vote who are otherwise disenfranchised and not going to.
Right.
And this is something that Trump succeeded at. I think he didn't need to get J.D. Vance on the ticket to do that, but I think that's probably what he was thinking.
If he had brought Senator Tim Scott, who's black from North Carolina, or brought on Nikki Haley, I think the election would be over. But he didn't.
No, it wouldn't be over. No, Trump has, because he was president before, people feel like they know Trump.
Yes.
And so his negatives are fixed at a certain high rate. And
So let me just jump in here. The question from Saito is if that well-known Trump loses, one question is what direction will the GOP take if he's defeated? And you
it's
would
gonna
know that
be-
better than us.
Well, I think all you can say is going to be a fight because there will be people who will try to argue I'm the next Trump. I should be the one. Maybe his son. Then you'll
So
have,
Trumpism continues even though that it
No,
lost?
It'll be an argument. There will be people who make that argument. And then there will be people like Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley. Nikki in particular will say, if it pans out this way, I told you so. That sort of republicanism can't win.
Right. Let me ask Ivo, we have another question here. Is there a connection between the change in Republican voters to be more isolationist and the stress about immigration? And I'd just like to, put your global hat on. How, in your best strategic sense, do modern democracies, be they in Europe or wherever they in the world, manage the responsibilities and stewardship of being a democracy, but also welcoming and opening to immigration? Because right now, that is one of the biggest drivers of populism in the world. And populism is not often pro-NATO, we'll put that, or pro-transatlantic alliance.
It's hard because immigration represents change, particularly if it's immigration from immigrant groups who don't look like or pray like or are like the dominant culture that exists. And in the United States, we've had massive anti-immigrant movements against people who are white and Catholic.
Right.
Irish and the Italians. It's the other that is part of it. The question is whether the politics in particular countries, in particular times, use the other to mobilize resentment. And Donald Trump has been a master of mobilizing resentment of the other, no matter who the other is, using race and immigration in particular. But at times, women, J.D. Vance is still running an entire campaign against women, particularly those who have cats, or at least don't have children. But it's the other. And this is how you mobilize in a fascistic model,
Right.
how you mobilize political power. It was Mussolini said, every society needs an enemy. Well, the American political system used to be that legislation, but overall, political parties weren't per se organized against each other as that's the other.
Right.
Now we have a political party that is organized in that fashion, and in which even those who disagree with the fundamental thrust of the leader's political direction, nevertheless are willing to abide by it, support it, and be part of it. And where if you do walk away, if your name is Adam Kinzinger or Lynn Cheney, you're excommunicated, completely excommunicated from the party. We had a Republican National Convention in which there was only one person in the entire convention who would either be president or been president or a presidential nominee or a vice presidential nominee. And that person was Donald J. Trump. There wasn't anybody else. No Pence, no Ryan, no Romney, no Bush, no Cheney, you name it, they weren't there because they have been excommunicated from the party.
Let me jump to Jacob here. Jacob is author of a best-selling book that's out right now. It's an extraordinary book and journey, and it's important to look beyond the moment we're in now because it goes back into the deep history with a deeply reported historical context. And it's called America Last, the Right Century-Long Romance with Foreign Dictators. But in this, so I want to give you a little plug there, Jacob. But I also want to say that one of the things I realized in your book and kind of reminding myself of how American history and success in the world, engagement in the world unrolled itself, particularly after World War II, was there were key people who became the designers and architects of, institutions of, major engagement around the world. And I'm going to be honest, I was disappointed in President Obama and Obama's team, with the exception of this gentleman, for not doing more to be transformational in that moment, to redo this global social contract for Americans around its institutional engagements, and to remind Americans why being the global cop and being a global security guarantor, being a global economic guarantor was in their interest. And that, I'm from Oklahoma, and one of the big things they would say in Oklahoma is we fought the Cold War and China won. And that stress that people felt economically. I'm just interested in, putting on your strategic hat and political hat, and given what you reported, what can Kamala Harris, since you support her coming in, you see her coming, I don't think Donald Trump will do this, what are the key transformational responsibilities she and her team would have in looking at that social contract of American engagement in the world and institutions, refixing it globally so our allies trust us, our foes worry about us, but our public inside America supports it? Because I think it's more wobbly than you do, but I'd like to know what you expect of her. I'd like to know what Jacob Heilbrunn would do to criticize Kamala Harris if she got it wrong.
Well, my biggest concern with Harris would be that if she were to waffle on the Ukraine conflict, which I see as the key struggle for the United States, if you want to call it the West, because I don't think that Vladimir Putin is stopping at Ukraine if he isn't halted there. So I think Harris's job is to build, not to reinvent. And actually, I give Biden more credit, I've written about it, than he's received. I think he's done a good job of reviving the alliances in Asia. He's expanded NATO. I don't have huge quarrels with Joe Biden on foreign policy. I think Harris, as a younger person, might actually take a somewhat more aggressive posture towards Russia. And so I'm fairly optimistic about where Harris would head in foreign policy. I can expand if you want, but I do want to say, to Sally's point, I actually don't think this election is going to be close. I think Harris is going to win big, and you will see a transformation.
So just real quick follow-up. One of the questions here is,
Sure.
there are isolationist tendencies also within the Democratic Party. Do you think that she could be swayed by them?
No, I think they're modest. She's already shut down the protesters in the party on Israel. She is not committing herself to what they want. She's waffling. I mean, she's not saying what she would do. I don't think you would see major change there. I think in the Republican Party is where you do see this isolationist trend, and thank you for the plug. My book is about how there's basically 100 years on the right of fawning over foreign dictatorships as a model for the United States. And I'm not trying to say that there wasn't this phenomenon on the left, but it only on the right and in the Republican Party, has it really been a political phenomenon, which is why this election,
Right.
maybe it's not 1860, but 1940.
Yeah. Ivo, can I ask you about Gaza?
Can I, just on that last question.
Oh, and you can see all the questions.
We can see questions. No, but on the question,
I
in
thought I
terms
was
of
the only one who
the
could see them.
isolationism within the Democratic versus Republican Party. Just on a NATO number, which I happen to pull up,
Right.
that Pew did. When asked, do you have a positive, do you have a favorable or unfavorable view? Conservative Republicans, unfavorable view, 59% of NATO. Liberal Democrats, unfavorable, 17%, 81 favorable.
Right.
So it's a 20-point gap between favorability and unfavorability for Republicans. It's a 70-point gap among Democrats. That's what I worry about most.
Mm-hmm.
It is the politicization of views on NATO that didn't use to
Can
be
you do a
political at
plug
all.
for the Chicago Council's annual survey on these? Because it's really important. What do you call it?
We do the Chicago Council survey. It's very good.
Yeah, got it right.
Of 2024.
I thought you had a better title.
We are publishing. The numbers are all on our website, globalaffairs.org.
It's really, really important document. I use it all the time. I just never look at the headline. So we'll have to come up with a more creative one. Let me just ask you, let's go lightning round with some of these. But there's a really important question here on, some in the world look at the war in Gaza and America's role with Israel on this as being hypocritical given the deep engagement with Ukraine. And we see Kamala Harris just in the interview that she did trying to navigate that. But as you sort of look at it, I do think there's a generational shift and change when it comes to looking at the Middle East, when it comes to looking at Gaza, and kind of status quo positions America has taken. Ivo, are those going to change? How will they play out in Trump? How play with Kamala Harris, and be fast?
No idea about Trump because I have no idea about anything he stands for. Kamala Harris will be different when it comes to the Middle East. She is from a different generation. Biden is from the generation that looks at Israel as the underdog. She's from a generation that looks at Israel as the uber dog and the superpower in the region.
Right.
If you parse her statements, they are different than Biden's, including even yesterday in the CNN interview where once again she said how it defends itself matters and that the war has to end and that the killings and sufferings has been too large. She's balanced it in a slightly different way than Biden. I wouldn't be surprised if you have a policy that is, like many, many Republican predecessors, by the way, much tougher on Israel than we've seen up to now.
I'm not going to ask this woman of Sally because I want to typecast, but I am interested in something I have not seen asked or talked about. And look, there is a lot of misogyny in the world. There's a lot of gender-based, I would call demeaning behavior. If Kamala Harris is elected president, Kurt, how are other world leaders going to, one, deal with it? And I love that Jacob just called her ruthless. I can attest to that from some things I know about. And that, she may be, I'm just interested in America for the first time in its history having a female president, how that's going to play out. I have been astounded by how little she references it. But I'm interested in how you would see the world dealing with her.
Yeah, I kind of look at it the way you described yourself being gay, and then it doesn't matter anymore. So by the time
I sometimes wish it did.
Yeah, by the time we end up with a woman as president of the United States, we're already past it. It doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And look around the world. There's been women leaders all over the place. Thatcher, Merkel, whatever. It's not an issue.
Next question.
Yeah. So Sally, I'm interested as you kind of look at this playing out, and I'm sort of interested in in some ways the J.D. Vance take and your take on it. Like when J.D. Vance has come in and J.D. Vance has talked about the post-menopausal women. I mean, like the kind of child. I mean, it's kind of. I mean, I don't want to basically use the word weird because it's become so politicized. But there's a weird element in some of the typecasting of people that J.D. Vance has made about the role that they play in childbirth and the child-oriented roles of the state of this. Just love to get your take on how effective that is.
This is 2024.
Yeah.
The concept that he is talking about post-menopausal women is insane. More women vote who are registered than men, which is why the Democrats are going to win. I mean, I'm 65 years old. I run my own company. My children, what is their life going to be? Every time women's health is on the ballot, we win. These guys are out of their minds. They're out of their minds. This is Handmaid's Tale. They're not getting any new votes. No cat lady. By the way, the famous cat lady is Taylor Swift,
Yeah,
who's going to come out, by the way.
Yeah. So why are they doing that? And so because there are voters. Again, I want to come back to this. Some voters are supporting. I want to be fair in this, but there's some element of a pugnacious American who identifies with
Kurt said
that.
it. They do not know how to pivot. They do not know how to pivot. They can have crass sexual innuendos, which they did yesterday. I'm not sure who that appeals to. Women vote more than men. And women's health is the #1 issue after the economy. So they're shooting themselves in the foot. And, they should listen to their staff because they know it should be about the economy.
One of the things I suggested to Nikki Haley when she was running in the primaries is just to point out it's not funny anymore.
Let me just ask you here. This is a blunt question here. You characterize Trump as racist, misogynistic, and a threat to democracy. I want to come back to that threat to democracy for a moment. And this just moved. Though, how come the Democrats are not more ahead in the polls? What's holding them back the most? I also want to raise this point because, Ivo, you mentioned threat to democracy. We have 2 minutes here. But it's also interesting, and I think E.J. Dionne and others have said, almost immediately after Biden was out of the race, when he was talking about Trump being a threat to democracy, she stopped using any of that language. She sort of elevated herself out of it, and she kind of laughs Trump off. And this kind of joy campaign or this good feeling is something I sort of think is working. But is there, to come to this point about how we define him, one, why aren't Democrats more ahead, to respond to this? But secondly, is there something about the death of democracy framing that doesn't work in politics when you're electing people?
So I actually don't think she's running around away from it. She's just embedding it in a larger story, and a story about America and who we are, which is the right story to embed it in. And Biden didn't have the rhetorical skills anymore. I think, secondly, the real question is not why aren't more Democrats voted for the Democratic ticket, is why you still have Republicans willing to vote for the Republican ticket.
Right. Great. Sally, 10 seconds.
So this is, I think, the most important. I get asked all by my European friends, what should we do, what should we do? We need to celebrate what our successes are. The NATO alliance has never been stronger. We've got two more members in. We've got troops on the border. The sanctions have held. And the new president, President Harris, is going to further expand our support for our transatlantic allies. And what we need from our Europeans is to not be negative and say, oh my God, and take Putin's talking points.
Jacob,
We're
10
winning.
seconds.
Don't make Donald Trump stronger than he is. Don't cower before him. Don't wander into a semantic bog about fascism. He's not that good.
Kurt Volker, I'm going to give you the last 10 seconds.
Yeah, don't fall for the apocalyptic scenarios. It's not going to be a catastrophe either way. It's not going to be great either way, but we will muddle through as we always do.
Can I tell you, this was a fantastic discussion. Ivo Daalder, Sally Painter, Jacob Heilbrunn, Ambassador Kurt Volker, thank you all so much. And let me tell you, please stay in your seats because the program continues within 60 seconds with the next session on post-pandemic healthcare strategies for the CE. Thank you all so much.